Mariam. I know a lot of familiar faces here, and I'm pretty sure you guys know me out there. Tom, first of all, I feel like we've been courting you for several years, and we're so excited that we finally have an opportunity to show your fantastic work. And anyone out there watching it has not come to the center, please come through February 15th to experience migration. I've looked at your work for about 6 months now digitally, but whenever Michelle first hung this piece actually started out over there, it was breathtaking to watch it. I really feel like you have to be in your body of work. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for sharing it.
Thanks so much.
I do want to kind of go and ask you a few questions that we thought about, certainly based off of some of the things that we've read about you leading up to the festival. So much of your work portrays the journey of sandhill cranes.
Right.
And that reminds us about a journey. So what is your journey in the world of fine art?
In the world of fine art, we're supposed to keep it short, right?
Succinct is the word.
For decades. So I graduated. I didn't really have someone who kind of guided me into the art world, but I was always interested as a kid in drawing and making cartoons and stuff. Always interested in the arts. And when I wanted to go to art school, my parents told me that's not going to happen. But if you go to a liberal arts college that has a great arts program, we'll support that. So I went to a small college in upstate New York. Fortunately, I've had people guide me all along my career. I was never, as I said, never really focused like my wife. My wife was super focused the entire time, but I kind of needed people to guide me. And at one point he said, you know, there's a new program at Parsons, an MFA program. It's just starting this year. Why don't you extend your college career? You'd think that would be a conversation that I'd have, but I was sitting over there, and my father and this chairman were sitting here talking about my future, right? And he said, well, I think we can get you in. And I looked over at it and I said, okay, well, that sounds great. So they got me into this master's program, which was an amazing program. And from there, I actually met my wife. And I think there's nothing better than when you meet someone who has that same kind of interest and goal. And so we started making work together. And we moved from New York down to Atlanta on a whim. We started a gallery in downtown Atlanta, and we started representing underrepresented artists. And people who were making an incredible work but just didn't get exposure. Underrepresented, I think, was a really good word for it. So, but that was difficult. It was hard to sell work from other people and not have all the time that I wanted to, or Gail had all the time that she needed to work. So we sold the business, and around 88, and so from 88 forward, we've been making our own work. And working with galleries, consultants, and private clients for the most part, all over the world. So it's been fun.
I love that. So this is a question that I've had for you since we had a discussion about the timeliness of this piece in particular that we're standing in front of.
Oh yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the different materials that you work with that create this?
That's a good question. You know, I think when people look over, they say glitter.
Yes, well that's what I did. My daughter, this is her favorite piece of the entire show. So.
Well, you know, there can never be enough glitter in life.
I agree, actually.
So,
what materials is actually?
So let's see. So it starts out in this case with aluminum. So I don't have the technical skills to make this. So I have someone make this, and I have someone make the canvas in New York, and someone makes the frame for me, and then it's all shipped to the studio, like that piece over there. So I never actually, to be honest, I don't make any of it. I have someone who actually does that pretty well for me. So someone makes this, it arrives in the studio. I begin to think about maybe a palette or a direction. In this case, we leafed it with aluminum, and then I painted this piece, the canvas. I was working on a large project in Kissimmee, Florida, huge, 28 feet, I think, by 9, 28 by 9. And I'd never used a sprayer before. And this canvas happened to be one of the practice canvases where I was in the studio spraying. And so this,
I can see that now.
Yeah, so you can see this little blue is in the background. So then I decided to find this tree shape. And then it's kind of like, so it kind of comes together in layers. So this started out, I gilded this, and I found a tree and we gilded in Japanese silver. So this is a dyed Japanese silver. Italians, Germans, and Japanese.
Can I ask you something? I don't want to stop you, but
Yeah, sure.
You can't go any farther. The Japanese silver, like, do you buy a color and then you dye
No,
the
so-
leaf, or like you buy the leaf that color?
So I buy the leaf that color. So
God, it's beautiful.
there's a company in New York where we buy all our leaf, and they import German, Italian, and Japanese leaf. And so the Germans and Italians, they're just like gold and silver. But the Japanese, they love color, right? So we have this big book of color that we can kind of look through, and every once in a while I go, ooh, that lavender, let's use that, or we'll pick a color out. In this case, I happen to have this color, and I needed a little light tone, so we ordered this color as well. So the other thing that was kind of fun was, if you notice, I work with an automobile manufacturer paint distributor in New Jersey, and this glitter is the kind of glitter that you see that car go by, and it started off at green and it ends up purple. So if you walk by the painting, you'll notice that it will change color as you walk by. So that kind of, part of the goal is to make the work as interesting as possible throughout the day, so the ambient light changes the nature of the work. So if you were to come back here at 9, it would be a completely different painting than here today. So for me, the goal was, in this particular piece, was to kind of throw enough into it materially that made it visually attractive through the range of the ambient daylight. So if we were to walk off screen here for a second, we could see the blue change from, in fact, I can see it now, it changes from green to royal blue, right, just in that. So that was part of the layering of materials. This, of course, the cranes in the background. This is a champagne, which is a 23 karat, 22.5 karat gold. It has a little, has mostly gold, but then it has a little titanium in it, some other materials.
It's incredible.
So that's fun.
And then are these the materials that you work with most commonly, or would you say that it is?
I work with them all the time.
That's great. You
So
can see it in all of your work. Now that you say that, I feel like I'm paying attention to the different layers of your work, and I guess you can see it. Now you also work on paper, so you work on panel large scale.
I do.
And then you also work with paper.
I do.
So do you enjoy one more than the other? Does it inspire you to do one thing when you see something? What's your process?
What's the process is, so drawing for me, like that little drawing down there, that little drawing with vellum and diamond dust. So those are,
That's lovely.
yeah, so more glitter, only more precious. Right?
Yes.
So that drawing down there, those are the kinds of drawings that I'll start a conceptual process with. I'll sit and just draw maybe 10 or 20 of those to kind of get an idea of direction and feel. Vellum is wonderful because you can always kind of flip it and see where, what it needs to be, and it's very erasable. And so I'll work those kinds of drawings to develop something like the panel that's on right next to it. So I know the kind of feel that I want with the cranes and what they're doing, and then I'll layer maybe a landscape over it.
Okay.
So paper is, the other part of it, there's a little paper piece above it you can see. It's just me just playing around with color and shapes and forms and abstraction in the studio. I try to set aside, the studios are always busy with something going on. And if I try to carve a little bit of the studio out just to be able to have a table with gouache and acrylic and things, just to play with color and materials and stuff. Gives me an opportunity to think without having to think about production.
Your playing around looks a lot different than my playing around. That's fantastic. Those pieces are beautiful. It kind of went around at the exhibition opening last night that your work did have crushed diamonds in it, so I'm happy you spoke to that piece in particular, because it was quite a conversation last night. So, and then I did kind of want to talk to you. We've been talking about this because, of course, we are in a unique time, and it's been tremendous in the arts community, performance community, visual art community. What do you feel like the artist's role is during this time, and how has it impacted you?
How's it impacted me? Well,
I mean, great, because you ended up curating.
great.
So win-win.
So win-win. I guess the greatest impact for me was that almost the day that this New York kind of exploded with Corona. Every gallery in my world, and I'm like a car, I've got 8 cylinders. If I'm not hitting on all 8 cylinders, then my car kind of sputters to a halt. So that car, basically, every one of it was closed. So no gas. for my business. I'm not sure what the artist role is. I know what my role is that this is gonna sound a little strange, but for me, I get up, I go to my studio, I don't see anybody, I go home. And I do that all the time, so that hasn't really changed all that much. What's changed is having to talk to, and galleries have slowly begun to open, and consultants have slowly begun to do some projects. Is the Zoom stuff. That's really the biggest part of it. Whereas I would normally, they would call me and say, can you come down? Can you fly over? Can we talk about this? Now it's, can we set up a Zoom conference call? So that's been the biggest part. My business is I'm still trying to understand. My wife is really trying to understand clearly, like, what does it look like going forward when in person may not be the way that we conduct business. Again, just going back to my practice, most artists just go to work in a space and don't see anybody. We actually don't like people.
They say it's an introvert's paradise right now.
Exactly right.
All the introverts
All the
are
introverts
extremely happy
They're all
right now.
happy right now. So I would say that's probably true for a lot of artists. Some are socially engaged and it's not. I mean, that's just not where I am. Unfortunately, last year, big impact for me is I go look at cranes all over. So I go to Bosque del Apache in New Mexico, I'll go to Tennessee, I'll go to New Mexico to photograph and get source material and get this tree branch, for instance. And that set of cranes, those have all closed down. So that part of it is fortunate. It is unfortunate. For me, I can kind of look back at my catalog and pull work. So some of these images are just images that I've had for a really, really long time, and I can just kind of recombine them. Honestly, I shoot thousands of images each time I go, so I can always go back to that portfolio of images that I shot in 2017 and find something that I haven't really focused on before.
Excuse me.
No, that's great.
You go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted you to speak, you spoke briefly to me earlier, but could you go and explain to people about your love and relationship with cranes?
Yes, please. I agree. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you for that question. Cranes. So cranes, I lived on a farm, about a 600-acre farm that in just south of Atlanta for the longest time. And I had never seen a crane in my life. But I was fortunate because we were the property was surrounded by 3 rivers. One of them was the Chattahoochee. And they created this natural kind of rise. And cranes are intelligent, super intelligent. They fly along and from thermal to thermal. So that's how they kind of slowly descend, and then they'll hit a thermal and they'll rise. And because of the nature of my house, it was one of those places where the hot air came right up off the Chattahoochee and up to our house and created a thermal literally directly over our home. And so we were in that eastern part of the flyway, coming from Florida and the Gulf, going up to Wisconsin, southern Canada. And they would hit my home and start kettling. And they would kettle up 1,500, 2,000 feet. But what's really wonderful about that process is, instead of them just kind of like cruising through, and they cruise pretty quickly, is that they would stop essentially for 5 to 10 minutes as they gained altitude. And you hear them. You could get kind of geeky about this. So cranes have this amazing vocal cord that wraps into their gut like a French horn. So you can hear them for miles and miles and miles, this clarion call, and never see them. And so they would announce that they're coming through, and because we're in the flyway, we would get literally 100, 200, 300, 500 cranes, and they would hit my house and just stop.
Wow. Oh, that's good.
And never having seen them or heard them before, it just fascinated me. I've always been interested in the natural world. My families have always been birders, but my mother looks at sparrows. I'd never seen a 6-foot thing.
Right.
Right? And they come in low over my house and then they explode and kettle in this fantastic kind of cacophony of movement. And so that really was my beginning of kind of interest. And the more that I became interested in it, the more I became more specific to where are they going, what are they exactly. And I became friends with a National Geographic photographer named Joel Sartori, who's right now doing this amazing book of animal extinction. Just a really fascinating guy from Nebraska. And literally, I didn't have, like, I could shoot little tiny photographs and I'd see a little crane, but Joel, because he lived in Nebraska, because he's a National Geographic photographer, provided me with an unlimited source of imagery. Literally for 3 years, I never saw a crane up close until I'd seen Joel's work. So once I had realized that this is where I can go to Bosque del Apache, I can go to Colorado, I can go to Lodi, California, I can go to Nebraska, which if it's not on your bucket list, needs to be, because 500,000 cranes on the Platte River waking up in the morning or coming into roost at night is one of the most amazing scenes you've ever seen in your life. Seen and heard, it's amazing. So that was really, that kind of became my fascination and kind of my obsession. And the more I thought about migration and their migration, the more I thought about how migration is something that's not just physical, right? It can be emotional, spiritual, psychological. So that really became, then I realized not only am I a crane geek, but I'm also interested in kind of those other dimensions about movement and time and space and psychology. So that it became a metaphor for me about change and returning.
Do the Japanese, don't they have a special relationship with cranes?
Almost everybody has a special relationship to cranes because they're found on almost every continent. And here we know that they're 10 million years old, right? So Japanese women, for instance, wouldn't conceive of getting married without cranes being on the back of their wedding kimono because cranes mate for life.
All right.
So
Is there, are you allowed to shoot cranes?
you are allowed to shoot cranes. You can, actually, we were talking about this last night, I think.
Oh.
You can, if Texas was able to, turn my phone off here. It is 1:30. If Texas, if you were to, if Texas issues enough crane licenses that if you were to go get a license and bag every crane that your license permitted, they would wipe out cranes within 1 season.
Leave it to Texas.
So, but the problem is that it's not just Texas. We were talking about Tennessee. Tennessee decided that they were going to start to attract cranes and bring the Eastern Flyway back. And as soon as they got to a number where farmers and hunters said, you know, it's time to start shooting, Tennessee decided that they would have an annual hunt as well. So it's problematic. I mean, obviously, 600,000 cranes landing in Nebraska is a great thing. They've made an incredible comeback. But a lot of times, whoopers, for instance, haven't. Right?
Yeah.
We have 631 whoopers in the United States, and it's difficult sometimes for young folks and for people not to. In Louisiana, I think we were just recently 2 were killed. So it's difficult. They mature around 3 to 4 years. It's difficult. They don't often take to the environment they're in. So that kind of hunting is difficult when people don't know what's going on.
Right.
And it takes about $100,000 to raise a crane, a hoover. That's about the impact. And so, especially when someone shoots a crane, let's say Louisiana, and they're 18, they don't really know what's going on. They just see 2 large white birds. They've killed $200,000 worth of federal money or in time, energy to invest in that. Love and care, and they're get a slap on the wrist.
Well, what's the point of shooting a crane? You can't eat it.
Cranes. Well, unfortunately, cranes are called the flying filet mignon of the sky. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, they weigh about 12 pounds. They're not huge birds, but
And so you do eat them?
they do eat them. Yeah.
So you were talking about the sandhill cranes?
Yeah, that's
that you can get a license
Yes, that's exactly right.
And it's
And that's what we
easy
have.
to mistake a sandhill or a hooping crane for a sandhill.
Right. So they're about the same size. The whiteness, though, is what kind of gives them away. But you're right. We have lesser and greater sandhill cranes, and we have a non-migratory species in the Gulf, in Mississippi, and in Florida. And then we have this kind of greater and lesser that migrate through the Eastern Flyway, the Midwestern Flyway, and the Canadian and the California Flyway, the Western Flyway. And a lot of these cranes are migrating anywhere from let's say Florida, coming through here, and going up to Wisconsin, and then maybe going to, as I said, southern Canada, many can keep going. Many keep going up and across Canada to Alaska. Some even go across the Bering Strait, 7,000 miles or so. So, and they replicate their flight pattern because I've taught you, you've taught him, he's taught her over 10 million years. So if you start off going to Alaska, that's where your family's going to end up.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing with us. I felt like my husband and I were talking about it yesterday. We felt like we had an education wrapped up into a conversation.
Sure.
And I definitely encourage anybody that's going to be around the rest of the afternoon to catch Tom. He's going to be lingering around the gallery. And then if you aren't able to come today and get to experience him in person, which I think is a must, please come to the show through February 15th or come to the Center for the Arts through February 15th to experience his work in person. I do feel like that is a must-see for those that are not able to enjoy it. But Tom, thank you so much, and then we welcome you to stay and hang out with us the rest of the afternoon.
Great,